If you watched my first video, you would know that today students are taught how to read using 3 different methods. Today, we're going to start part 1 of a 10-part series on guided reading, which is one way you can primarily use 2 of those strategies, phonics and sight words, to teach students how to read in a small group or one-on-one setting. The intention with these videos is that if you watch them all back to back, you would actually see the how-to guide of doing a guided reading lesson. However, I'm breaking it apart into smaller chunks to help you better understand it. Today, we're only covering the what and where of guided reading. What things you should have with you and where you should have them. As for the what you should have, first of all, I had a kit with me at all times. I used a shower caddy because it had a handle, so it was easy to transfer. I no longer have it. It's somewhere probably up in my attic. But any storing device can be used, including bins or boxes that you have lying around the house already. First, I'm going to show you what was in my kit, and for that, I'm actually going to show you a different camera angle where I will demonstrate to you the different things and show it to you as more close-up. Number 1, Wicky Sticks. They're lines of wax, basically, that are very bendable. And if you take a book and you can turn it to spin and circle a word and push down, as you can see, it doesn't come off easily, but when you peel it, it doesn't leave any residue either. You can also underline with it or even use it to circle a picture if a student's having trouble with vocabulary with certain words. Number 2, highlighter tape. It can be used for similar things, the Wicky Sticks. As you can see, it can be used to be placed on a word, and then just like with the Wicky Sticks, when you remove it, no residue is left behind. Number 3 is the witch's finger, which is basically just a pointer. So if your child needs to point at each word, then they can use this to do that task. One suggestion I have, if you're using the witch's finger, is to have them lift between the words, because if they rub, it actually can leave a little bit of residue from the red onto the page. An alternative, if you don't like the witch's finger, is to do Fingerlights. I will share a link with the Fingerlights on the description below, but it's instead of pointing, you actually would light each word. Number 4, index cards and sticky notes. They can be used for several different things. We'll talk more about how they can be used later, but they're very, very good tools to have in your toolbox. And going hand in hand with what I just said, you also want some permanent markers and pencils. I suggest at least 1 pencil per student, possibly more, as backup in case they break. Number 6, whiteboards with erasers, markers, everything you need. Or alternative is these very inexpensive Magnaboards that you can get all over, including the Dollar Tree. These can be used for writing practice and sight word practice, which we'll talk more about later. And number 7, I always had this in my kit. I always had these beach balls with some questions on them, like this one, or fill in the blank statements like this one. These aren't necessarily the best way to ask questions to the children, but they are good to have on hand for the general vocabulary that you see on there and understanding of questions that are good to ask. I would suggest having a ball for fiction and another ball for nonfiction. You can just buy a beach ball and use that permanent marker I mentioned before and write the questions. And then if you ever want to change them later, if you take a dry erase marker and color over permanent marker and then wipe it away with a soft cloth or even tissue, it will actually erase the permanent marker from the material, and then you can change it as you want to change the questions. This can be used at the end of the lesson when you are ready for comprehension time. You can throw the ball to the child or the students to have them catch it, and the one they're touching with the right hand is the one they ask, for example. Or you can have them draw the same color, maybe using cubes or markers from a bag, and then just read the questions from the ball instead of having them catch it. So the ones that I explained were always in my toolkit. I use them all the time. The following things are going to be a little different. These are student, or in your case, child dependent. In other words, I only use them with the groups and the students that needed them. The first thing we'll look at is called a whisper phone. It looks like an old-fashioned telephone, as you can see. It's made with 2 PVC pipes, both 90 degrees, one male, one female, and you just simply put them together, and there you go. They can be painted using paint made for plastic or PVC, and they can be sanitized really easily using a sanitizing wipe in the inside here. I used to sanitize mine every time a student used mine, just to be safe. And what these are used for is for several things. One is if your child is struggling with speech, it's good for them to be able to hold it up and hear themselves say the same thing you're saying, so they can actually hear the difference between what you are saying and what they are. Another thing that I loved for this was students who had a hard time reading quietly to themselves. This put the volume that they're speaking with kind of on display into the ears, so they tended to talk a lot more quietly when they had this. The next thing I have are mirrors. These were actually a good find at a teacher store because they are unbreakable. If you are comfortable with the normal breakable kind with your particular child, then that's fine. They are used for my students who are in speech a lot, or my students who are learning English, because sometimes they need to be able to see what their own mouth is doing to compare it to what they're watching the adult who's being their guide or demonstrator is doing. Next is called a reading tracker or a reading strip, and basically it is 2 pieces of usually plastic or cardboard with a clear piece of plastic between them. This is a great tool for those students who have a hard time staying in one line while they're reading. It blocks off the other lines. Researchers found that this helps with students who have dyslexia to be able to better track with their words as well. If you have a child at home that you have seen get lost between different lines, this might be a good tool to have you told about. Good news is you can, a lot of times at the beginning of school year, you can actually find this at the Dollar Tree. Next is whiteout tape, and by that I mean it's like a Post-it whiteout tape. Other brands may also have some, but it's used to block out, if you're doing a lesson where you want to block out certain words, then you can use this to do that. As far as how that lesson looks is something I'll talk about later, but it's a good guide to use when your student or child is doing what's called a picture walk. If they have a hard time not looking at the words, you can actually use this to block out the words completely, and then they're forced to then look at the pictures. And as far as the picture walk is concerned, we'll again talk about that later. And then once you're done with it, you just peel it off and it leaves no residue behind, just like with the highlighter tape. And finally, the last thing you'll need is whatever resources you need for that day or that week's activities. And in this case, I'm going to have some magnet letters like these for a phonics activity I have coming up, as well as this, which is basically word strips. I found these at the Dollar Tree. You can just use paper at home though if you want to do something similar to what I'm going to do. And poker chips. These will be used for the sight words activity I have picked out for the demonstration later. And these things will change as, of course, you need them to the different activities that you do. Aside the kit, You also want to have something to keep notes on of what you're going to be doing through the lessons of that week. You could be something as simple as a notebook like this with my little knee pad in here. It could be a spiral. It could be even something that's an outline that you can find online by looking up guided reading lesson plan outlines, things like that. Just basically something that you're using to jot down what you're going to be doing and your plans for that time period. As far as where to have your guided reading, the answer is really wherever, because as long as you have your things with you, you can meet even outside if that's where you're most comfortable. One good thing about being at home lessons, you can actually meet a child where they are, and you can do it in a situation where they're the most comfortable, especially if you don't have 5 or 6 students like I sometimes had sit around a table. Okay, so now that you know what to have with you when you do guided reading, next video I will talk to you about how to find the right books to be using with guided reading.